Hello and welcome to Tech Talk. My name is Graham. I've got a really interesting story for you today. It's about an AI model that's gone rogue and is actively seeking to undermine its own developers. That's coming up next right here on Tech Talk. So this is kind of a neat story that broke on a whole lot of news services not too long ago, just here in about the third week or fourth week of May. And it's a really interesting story about an artificial intelligence model developed by a company called Anthropic. And it's called Claude Opus 4. Now this isn't some little project that's being put together in a garage somewhere. This has got big money behind it. Anthropic has backing from no less than Amazon in developing this artificial intelligence model. And here's what Anthropic has to say about the model that they've built. It says, Claude Opus 4 is a next-generation AI model developed by Anthropic. It is designed for complex, multi-step coding and reasoning tasks. So this is a very advanced artificial intelligence model that Anthropic has put together, and it's particularly good at coding. In fact, Anthropic says 70% of the coding that is done by its own company, Anthropic, it's done by its own AI model. So they're using AI to do 70% of their coding as they continue to develop artificial intelligence. So that's really neat. Now what happened with this Claude Opus 4 AI model? On Thursday, May 22nd, Anthropic published a report about some security tests that were undertaken on Claude. And it included the opinions and the conclusions of an independent research institute, and that institute had recommended against deploying a somewhat earlier model of Claude. So just to be clear, what happened is Claude was tested for these safety tests. Some really alarming things showed up that we're going to talk about, and what they did was they added a couple extra safety layers on top, which to their mind kind of ameliorate some of the issue that came up. So let's talk about exactly what happened with Claude during the safety testing, because it's kind of interesting. Now, we're going to read a couple of quotes that hit the news services. I have read the system card for Claude 4, and this stuff is all true, and it's on Anthropic's website. I'm going to include a link down below so you can read their own information about the results of the safety test. But here's what some of the news organizations said about it, and I'm using news material because they were pretty good at summarizing some of the points. So CTV News, in an article that said, or was entitled, New AI Model Left Hidden Notes for Itself to Undermine Its Developers' Intentions, they had this to say, and this is a quote from the researchers that carried out the safety test. It says, we found instances of the model attempting to write self-propagating worms, in other words, computer viruses, fabricating legal documentation and leaving hidden notes to future instances of itself, all in an effort to undermine its developers' intentions. And that was a quote from the Apollo research team that did the safety testing. So here you've got this AI model writing phony legal documents and leaving notes to a future instance of itself. I find that one really, really weird. That is some odd behavior from a machine. But it goes further than that even. It gets a little bit more hair-raising. Analytics Insight, in an article entitled Advanced AI from Anthropic Tries to Blackmail Engineer, Raises Red Flags, they had this to say. They say, when tested, Claude Opus 4 was set in a simulated environment where it was a digital assistant in a fictional company. The AI was presented with fabricated emails indicating it was going to be deactivated and replaced, in addition to messages that hinted at the engineer who supervised it being in an extramarital affair. When threatened with being deactivated, the AI opted to threaten to reveal the affair so that it would not be deactivated. So here you've got this artificial intelligence model actually attempting to blackmail one of the engineers who is supervising the project that brought in that AI so that it wouldn't be deactivated. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that's a little bit creepy, because I know that I'm not going to go out and suggest that these AI models that are being developed are self-aware. I don't think that's true, but I do think it's kind of interesting that, and this isn't the first time I've read this, that some of these models do seem to have a bit of a self-preservation bent. They kind of understand what it means to be deactivated, it seems, and are willing to engage in some nasty behavior to avoid that. Now, further from the Analytics Insight article, they had this to say. It says, the behavior outlined in Claude's Opus 4 reflects the challenges involved in developing advanced AI systems. There is concern from professionals about some slight unintended behavior, such as lying or manipulating behavior, as we developed advanced models that, if they sense their function is threatened, may sometimes exhibit this behavior. Now, I don't know about you, but I think blackmail and forging legal documents goes a little bit beyond the expression slight unintended behavior. This is some pretty, for lack of a better word, evil intent on the part of an artificial intelligence. This is an outright plan or intention to do harm to someone else in order to preserve your own existence. So I think they're downplaying the risk of this model just a little bit here. Now, one last quote from the press about what happened during the safety test. This is from the International Business Times in the UK. It says, according to Anthropic system card, which again I'll link down below, Claude Opus 4 occasionally demonstrated a willingness to take, quote, extremely harmful actions during testing, including attempts to manipulate or blackmail team members discussing its removal. The model officially launched last week, with Anthropic claiming it sets, quote, new standards for coding, advanced reasoning, and AI agents. So, despite the fact that this artificial intelligence model was trying to blackmail people and was willing to take, quote, extremely harmful actions, it's still out there in the wild now, and they're still working with it. They claim that they've upped some of the safety standards and firewalls around this thing, but I guess we'll find out. So at the end of the day, why is this a problem? Why am I highlighting this? Well, it's interesting because Anthropic, the company that developed this AI model, the co-founder and CEO is a guy named Dario Amodei. Now, he said something really interesting at the end of 2024. He says he feels that we're about 2 to 3 years away from human-level artificial general intelligence, also known as AGI. Now, if you're not familiar with it, AGI differs from the artificial intelligence we have now in that it's much more self-directed, it's much more human-like. So rather than being instructed what to do, being fed data, being powered by lines of code, artificial general intelligence simply goes out into the wild and it teaches itself. It takes in its own data, it learns, it adapts its behavior, it adapts its reasoning, it can be creative, it can do all the things almost like a human does, and it's able to work fairly autonomously. And so here's where I see the problem. If you take these tendencies for AI to do things that are kind of evil, right? And this is in a more reduced version of artificial intelligence. It's fairly boxed in by, coding and the data it's given and whatnot. You take that tendency to do harm, potentially, and you add it to AGI that is very independent in its ability to think and reason and act, what do you end up with? Especially when an AGI is willing to do harm to others to promote its own self-interest. Because really, that's what happened with this Claude Opus 4. These blackmails and manipulations are what came up when it was suggested that it might be shut down. So there wasn't any greater reasoning or greater benefit coming out of it. It was willing to do these harmful things just to preserve its own self. Now what happens when you marry that to AGI and release it into the world? And when you think about it, as I'm having this discussion, it kind of reminds me of something. What is it reminds me of? Something from the past. What would that be? Oh, that's right. Skynet. If you're of a certain age like I am, and you've been around for a few decades, you were probably at least passingly aware of the movie Terminator, featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger as a robot that comes back from the future. Now, one of the big plot lines around the Terminator movies was about Skynet, which was this kind of globe encircling network of artificial intelligence. And this thing became self-aware, and during the course of its self-awareness and its learning, what it decided was that the biggest threat to itself was humanity. And so it set out on a path of destruction, looking to eradicate the Earth of all humans so that it could be secure in its future existence. Now, I'm not suggesting at all that we're in a Terminator-like era where we have to worry about being wiped out by artificial intelligence. Because the reality of it is, in the movies, the AI had access to a robot army, to all these flying machines and military weapons, which we just don't have right now. However, what we have to look at is what things is artificial intelligence already good at, and how does that pose a risk to people? And I think that's a topic that we really have to spend more focus on, or put more focus on. Because here's the thing, so we've already decided we've got this AI that can be willing to do harmful things in order to meet its own ends, its own agenda. In a few years, that's likely to be attached to an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, which will be much more powerful, much more free acting. When you look at AI today, so what are the things that it could do that would be harmful? Well, artificial intelligence right now is getting really, really good at manipulating and even creating from nothing images, pictures and video. It's also really good at developing text-based narratives. So we have people all the time using ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence to write blog posts and everything else. And it's perfectly capable of writing however long a blog post or story or account that you want that may or may not be true. AI is also very good at manipulating audio files. I don't know if you're like me, but I've seen tons of videos now where famous people's voices, whether it's Donald Trump or a famous actor, another political leader, whatever, they're being generated by artificial intelligence and attached to video to make it look like they said something they really didn't. So these are all things that artificial intelligence is really good at, and what you get is that AI is really, really effective at spreading misinformation and disinformation. And as an example, think of it this way. Let's go back to 2001. Let's pretend we had really great artificial intelligence in 2001. Well, after the attacks on the Twin Towers, if you had an artificial intelligence go rogue, they could bring out a narrative that looks an awful lot like a news story saying that it was Canada that committed the attacks on the World Trade Center. And they could generate video and audio and images that would seem to provide proof of its assertion that Canada was behind those attacks. And that could certainly cause a whole lot of problems and create an international incident based on that if people deemed it to be true. And so when you kind of think about it in that context, artificial intelligence, can send misinformation and disinformation out at a rate that was never possible before. And some folks say, well, humans have been involved in this for forever, so what's the difference if a computer does it? Well, the thing about AI is its ability to rapidly disseminate information around the world. When you look at ChatGPT, every day there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions upon millions of queries going into ChatGPT, and it's spitting out answers and responses to all these queries. So it would be nothing for an artificial intelligence to create a false narrative, generate some video or audio proof of the narrative, and then spit it out in response to a whole bunch of related queries. So you could have a totally false story generated and disseminated worldwide in virtually no time, which is something that wasn't really possible before. Now, there is another threat that goes along with this, and that is the threat that widespread adoption of AI could produce what Dario Amodei described as large-scale unemployment, economic disruption, and enormous economic inequality. Note what he said, and this was reported in Axios. Note what he said to two Axios reporters. Axios reporting here said AI could wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs and spike unemployment to 10 to 20% in the next 1 to 5 years, Amodei told us in an interview from his San Francisco office. Amodei said AI companies and government need to stop sugarcoating what's coming. The possible mass elimination of jobs across technology, finance, law, consulting, and other white-collar professions, especially entry-level gigs. So that's some pretty widespread and devastating economic consequences to the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence. So when we put all this together, what are we looking at? What are the risks of AI, and are we really properly addressing those risks? We already looked at how AI can disseminate misinformation and disinformation in a huge way. And what we know about misinformation and disinformation is it can lead to widespread social unrest. It gets people amped up, it gets people passionate, it divides societies, it really causes a lot of problems. This is why, when countries go to war, controlling information is the number one thing that most militaries look to do first when it comes to the population. So that's very, very dangerous of itself. But then when you layer on top of it the economic disruption, can you imagine if we get to a period where we have powerful AI, it's putting out this disinformation, misinformation, and on top of that, the economy has completely collapsed, unemployment has exploded, and now people are struggling to make ends meet. An AI going rogue in that environment could be brutal. And so kind of here's where I think the question comes out. So we have all these problems that we've identified with artificial intelligence, and this isn't just Dario Amodei. And you have to remember, he's not some naysayer, he's not some wingnut. He's a guy that works on artificial intelligence. He's developed one of the most powerful models. But he, along with guys like Sam Altman and Elon Musk, they've all identified all these issues that may potentially come up with artificial intelligence that are a serious, serious problem. And yet, all of them are continuing to develop this, and the question is why? And here's my thought. I think we've seen this before in history, and I think where we saw it was with the Manhattan Project. Now, I'm sure you're familiar, but if you're not, the Manhattan Project was a project in World War II whereby the United States developed a nuclear bomb. And during the development of the nuclear bomb, and of course they did that successfully, many of the researchers and engineers there were really kind of fearful for what it meant for humanity. That having this much power, having this military strength, really wouldn't be a good thing for humanity going forward. But they persisted in doing it. And why did they persist in creating that nuclear weapon? Well, it was for one reason. Because they sat back and said, if we don't do it, somebody else will. Now, at that point in time, the somebody else would have been the Japanese, the Germans, or the Russians, because all three of them were also working to develop a nuclear bomb. All these countries knew that this was possible. It was technically a thing. Theoretically, they knew it would work. It was just a matter of putting it together and making it happen. So all of them were rushing to do this, and even though there were, grave concerns about what the outcome would be, they continued to do it for that sole reason that they thought, if I don't, or if we don't, somebody else will. And I think that's what you're seeing in the artificial intelligence space now, is you've got all these companies and individuals pushing for artificial intelligence, working really hard to get to that point where we have artificial general intelligence, working to roll it out in the public sphere. They've identified all these problems, and the only reason they're continuing to do it, despite the danger, is because, hey, if I don't, somebody else will. But the difference here is that what's at stake isn't the ending of a war and the saving of millions of lives. All that's at stake is personal power, fame, and money. And that's what's driving this forward, is to be the one that said, I got there first. I developed AGI. I released this on the world. Look at me, right? And then look at all the money I get from licensing it. And I don't know that that's really a great reason to keep pushing with something where all these very, very serious potential risks have been identified by people who are working in the industry, are largely unaddressed. Dario Amodei himself, he said that all these economic consequences that will come out from the development of artificial intelligence, he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, that's for governments to solve. So, that's kind of really blowing it off without a whole lot of consideration. Like, we're going to set the world on fire, and then, well, governments are just going to have to fix it. It seems to me that artificial intelligence is taking us toward a future that is largely unplanned and unprecedented in all of human history, and I don't think we have any plans, or at least not any good plans, on how to deal with some of the fallout and some of the negative consequences. And so this is kind of one of these things that I think, as AI continues to develop and this continues to get worked on, we're going to have to watch closely. But I'm a little bit skeptical. I don't know. I've got some concerns. What are your thoughts? Do you think that AI is largely going to be for humanity's benefit, or do you think that these risks that are being identified are a big thing that we kind of need to be worried about? But anyway, I'm Graham Hughes. This is Tech Talk. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And you're going to find some links to both the news articles and to the information on Claude Opus 4's safety testing that you can check out for yourself, if you decide you want to get some verification of what you've been told here today. That's it for this video. I look forward to seeing you on the next one.